So now we're going to make the buttonhole, something you've all been through. Just to recap, we hide the end of the thread in between the layers of cloth, and that's in between the layers of cloth, so you can't really see the thread there. And you could, if you like, make a knot on the thread here and then cut it off later. First stitch, just going around like this. It's not a buttonhole stitch, just to keep the gimp in place. And then secure that in there. Okay? Now we could, the gimp tends to move about a bit, so it's useful just to either put a basting thread or a pin to keep that gimp in place. And do the buttonhole stitch. Buttonhole stitch is the thread that's coming out of the eye of the needle. You pull towards you and around. So, towards you and around. So the 5 main points to think of after you've marked your buttonholes, the size that you need, and you do that machine stitch around, and then you do that raw edge felling stitch just to keep the edges together and prevent it from raveling. After all of that, you need at least 5 other points. One, of course, as you know, is the stitch itself. So, thread towards you and around. And these are not necessarily in order of priority. They're all equally important, and they all ought to be thought of and actioned simultaneously. So you've got the stitch, pull the thread towards you and around. The next is to have the same width of stitch all the way through. By same width, I mean from the edge of the buttonhole to where you're actually sticking the needle in. So this will be the width of the stitch. The third point is to pull with the same tension all the way through. The fourth point is to pull to the same angle. Could be 45-degree angle, it could be a 180-degree angle, it could be 90-degree angle. If you want to make a very thin buttonhole, then you keep it between 90 and 180 degrees. The next point is the same distance apart. So you've got the width of the buttonhole. Here we've got the width of the buttonhole from there to there. And then you've got the distance apart of the stitches. So the actual stitch itself, first point. Second point is the tension that you've pulled the stitch. The third is the direction, the angle. The fourth is the width. And the fifth is the distance apart. Now, it sometimes happens when you whip the thread around that it gets caught in the point of the needle. Just make sure that does not happen. So just pull enough towards you. You need approximately 1 meter of silk to make a front buttonhole. To make a 2.5 centimeter buttonhole, approximately 1 meter. And on the cuff, which is 1.5 centimeters, you need approximately 70 centimeters. So each reel of buttonhole silk is 10 meters. And that's enough to complete a jacket and still have a little bit extra. If you don't have GIMP, GIMP is a much better finish because it gives it a bit of firmness But if you don't have GIMP, you can use 4 cords of regular thread and wax and curl and press. So basically you're trying to create the thickness of the GIMP. And when you're sticking the needle in to do the buttonhole stitch, be sure that you're pushing the needle mainly upwards rather than across. Because if you're going across, then it means that you're not picking up as much of the underlayer. And now as we approach the keyhole, we gradually start pulling the stitch vertically. Because this is the area with the neck on the button when you've sewn it. Of course, when you are actually making your buttonhole and you're sewing around the GIMP, and I say around the GIMP, try and avoid sewing through the GIMP, because not only does the GIMP give you a bit of firmness, you also need the GIMP to pull the buttonhole back into shape wherever it may have stretched in the process of making. And when you punch a buttonhole, don't punch too big a hole. In fact, the holes that you have in the buttonhole punch, if you use the second smallest, that'll be fine. Because as you make the buttonhole and you pull the thread, as I am doing now, it tends to make the keyhole bigger. And gradually you go around and observe. Let me remind you, observe when I'm actually sewing. I'm sewing. I'm pulling the thread vertically, upwards, straight up. As you make the buttonhole, sometimes the twist uncurl the opposite direction, so just keep spinning around the needle a little after each stitch. And if by chance you miss a stitch, actually, I should tell you this, if you went around like that and you missed and you just pulled, just get the needle back to the loop and you'll get your stitch back. Now as you get towards the end, you see that we're at the same level here. I'm going to just take it one stitch beyond that level. So I'm sewing right to the very end. And now I'm just going to close the buttonhole. Where I've got just a little stretching here, just pull that GIMP back and be good there. And we tuck, just whip that around, longer piece around and pull the GIMP inside. Just keep that flat on the inside. Any further pulling you need to, you can do that there. And keep the corner, the edge, as flat as possible. We're now going to do a roll tack to complete. So 1 meter was much more than I needed. tuck the needle into the opposite direction where you've just started, to the opposite side rather. Just pinch the two together so the buttonhole would stay closed really tight at that point. Come back around on the other side, tuck the needle where you finished the buttonhole, and that's about all you'd need at this stage to do the roll tack. So as you come back around, you now continue your roll tack from the side that you've actually started to make the buttonhole. So you use that first loop and now the second loop as the base for your roll tack. The roll tack is just a finishing stitch. And then back onto the other side again. And now we can cut this right against the edge where we finished. And this you can actually do similar as you've done on the outside. There we are, buttonhole done.